I thought I'd share a picture of Phil after our last clinic. But more seriously, what it shows is that the human body has evolved perfectly to run, to take part in exercise, to be active. We know that those that are exercising on a regular basis live 7.2 years longer than those that don't. So by being active, by getting involved in sport, you might pick up injuries and illness along the way, but you're doing yourself a lot of good. Scotland has been inhabited for 14,000 years, as I say, and it's only really in the last 100 years that we've become less active because, essentially, it's Scotland's fault. We invented the television, we invented the phone, we invented the refrigerator. So if we can all get active in this room, if we all take part in sport, perhaps we redress that balance a wee bit. So my background is working as a day-to-day general practitioner, also working as a sports and exercise medicine doctor, and my best friend is my passport. Essentially, my wife told me that the three things that you require in life are her, so a good wife, an excellent physiotherapist, which I'd agree with, and a very good blue suit. But essentially, I don't spend that much time in the house. I've spent a bit of time working down at the Olympics, the Paralympics, and my current work involves working for the Sport Scotland Institute of Sport, the European Tour Golf, Scottish Rugby. I've done some public health policy work with the Scottish Government. And currently, I also do some work at the University of Edinburgh and also at Phil's clinic down here, seeing members of the public, seeing university athletes, and anyone essentially that we can help. I'm keen to get involved with to work out how we can move things forward from a sports medicine point of view. Essentially, I used to be a climber, a bit like Phil, but I wasn't very good at it. My bones were made of Weetabix, because what I wanted to do is essentially just see a bit of the world. Play a bit of tennis, play a bit of squash. You guys from People's Tennis Club, if you're here, will know that I'm not very good. You beat me every time. But because of my limitations in all these different other sports, I've had to turn my hand to do running, and it's allowed me a unique chance to visit some incredible parts of the world, to see the world at the pace of a runner rather than driving around. You see so much more picking it up at that sort of pace. And again, I mean, there's no better part of the world than Scotland. Skye, the Scottish borders, just some amazing places that you can get about. You can get active and you can go jogging. I've been fortunate enough also to test myself in different areas. And actually, as a runner, I'm pretty limited. I've not got a great engine. I really enjoy it and I work hard at it. But essentially, as soon as there's a wee bit of science involved, as soon as the location is a bit more difficult, I suppose I find that a wee bit easier because you can cheat a bit more and apply a bit of science and involve the right people. So Phil's covered some great stuff in relation to injury prevention and the treatment of injury, and I'd really back you up in that, Phil, in saying that the expertise that you've got working for the Springboks, working for Leicester, working for these different elite organisations is clearly something that is unique. And I think the Scottish Board is really blessed with a lot of great podiatrists, a lot of great physiotherapists. So I won't labour too much on that, but I'll talk a bit about it. There's also the issue of illness prevention. We can treat illness. Prevention is better than cure, and we can also treat it effectively when it actually occurs. Performing your best. Essentially, we don't all have the opportunity to win Commonwealth gold medals, but we can achieve whatever we're looking to do if we've got that focus, if we involve the right people. Essentially, success is in your hands. It might be outside your comfort zone, but it's certainly there. I'm also looking to share my experiences, some mistakes that I've made. There are loads of them. So this is how running came about for me. I'd been jogging and going up some hills in South America, climbing Aconcagua and whatever, and entered the Marathon des Sables. It's a 250-kilometre race through the Sahara Desert. Has anyone heard of it? It became famous because an Italian policeman called Mauro Prosperi got lost several years ago. And ended up in entirely the wrong country, having not eaten or drunk for 5 days. So, I mean, I've heard that the nose is a rudimentary compass, and if you get completely lost, you just spin around and you'll eventually face north. But Mauro didn't know this, so he got completely lost. And the reason he actually survived was he eventually found an abandoned building with some dead bats inside it and ate those. Now, apparently dead bat meat is very good for worms, but essentially I'd rather actually find my own way through the desert, but I made different mistakes to Mauro. I went to do that race in my Argentina shirt that I just bought from the market. You can see my rucksack wasn't big enough, so I had to carry my water in my hands, and I was wearing a pair of surf shorts and stuff such as that. So I hadn't really thought out my strategy. Hadn't really worked out that everyone would be snoring in my tent like a rogue elephant, so I didn't get much in the way of sleep. I just bought my food from the market. I hadn't had my immunisations. Essentially, I spent a fair bit of time in the toilet because I picked up a bit of D&V, and it made me think, surely there's more to life than this. If I could actually go to that race and do reasonably well, surely I could do better by just applying some of the things that people cleverer than me can tell me. So that was a fantastic race and a great introduction. But then I went over to Outer Mongolia, and I was really inspired by meeting some folk. A nomad I'm thinking of in particular, after the end of this 250k race, I looked like death. Essentially, I'd finished the race, I was enormously hungry, I was enormously thirsty, and this guy just came out with his one goat and some cheese and just said, oh, here's some cheese, have my bed, you can sleep there and stuff such as that. And he was just enormously kind, and it made me think, I've got to take on a challenge. I've got to work out how I can put a wee bit back to the people of Mongolia. So eventually I came up with a challenge, sitting in the pub one night to run from John O'Groats to the Sahara Desert. It's quite good. Beautiful part of the world. A unique opportunity to see it, and also a great chance to get out of some wedding planning. I was getting married in 3 months' time. So I'd get back with a week to spare, it'd be fine. So these are the things that I was going to encounter. We as runners will recognise that you're not always sick, but I really needed to prevent these things happening. If I got a lot of D&V, even if I got the cold, the flu, my hay fever was playing up and stuff such as that, I was bound to run into trouble. I also knew that 70% of endurance runners by that time become iron deficient, so it's pretty clear I was going to become anemic by running that sort of distance. So essentially I put strategies into play. It didn't work initially. I got a dose of the craps coming back from the jungle in Indonesia. But it was all about doing the small things well to prevent injury and illness occurring. And part of it was down to nutrition. You can see that Scotland is not always blessed with the greatest of sustenance. I mean, I know that obviously the prize for next door is just absolutely phenomenal, but you can imagine the offers of fish and chips, of haggis suppers and stuff such as that. Because I was having to eat like a rogue rhinoceros, 7,500 calories a day, enough food for 3 men, enough food for a pack of anacondas, and essentially that was it. It was not only a running challenge, but also a question of getting the right nutrition on board, eating plenty of carbs, and I suppose earning them. But for anyone that's ever run to Morocco, and I can recommend it, I've still got the maps. You'll pick up some dings, you'll get some injuries along the way, and it is as much about prevention and the things that Phil discussed as well as actually curing. But there were things that actually occurred that meant that injuries were inevitable. If you're running that sort of distance day after day, 7 to 8 days, 34.5 miles every day, no breaks at all, then things were going to go wrong. And some of that came down to the fact that the conditions are different than what I expected. It was that really cold winter, so there's 3 weeks of just pure snow, running through 1.5 feet of snow at times. And it was that change in terrain that Phil describes. So doing something different. An increase in volume in terms of the amount I was doing. I don't usually run 34.5 miles every day. It was only when I was doing that. It was also a change in the terrain, running through deep snow all the time. And that was the first thing that happened. And I remember actually coming through the Scottish borders, running through Edinburgh and then heading down to Melrose that day. And my Achilles tendons looked like sticks of rhubarb. They were massive. And folk were telling me to stop and stuff like that. And I remember just thinking, there's something that we can do for this. We just need to modify biomechanics. We need to alter the terrain that we're running on, and it will get better. And that's always the case. There's always a solution. It might not be the solution that you want to actually do first up, but there always is a solution to overuse injuries. So the problems I was encountering at that time were, and anyone that falls asleep is getting zapped with this, a lack of control. I couldn't really control the weather. I couldn't really control where I was going. I hadn't really thought out the route. I'd worked out that John O'Groats to the Sahara Desert was 2,660 miles, and I could get back in time for my wedding. I hadn't thought really the route out apart from that. Increased volume. I went from running less to running that sort of distance, so I knew that certainly injuries were going to flare up and I just needed to manage them. So I did a fair bit of training in preparation for it to try and make the increase in load as gradual as possible. The running surface. Again, one of my favourite occupations is not being hit by trucks. So with having to run down a road all the time, I was tending to have to run down one particular side of the road. So that led to injuries such as iliotibial band syndrome. It led to pain in one particular knee and things such as that. So it was about actually managing to get off-road, to get onto a softer surface, especially when you're trying to recover from injuries. And some of the solutions were this. Phil showed a slide that essentially the three things that lead to overuse injuries are an increase in volume, a change in what you're doing in terms of intensity, and your biomechanics. So if I couldn't alter what I was actually doing in terms of the volume and the amount of running I was doing, otherwise I'd be late for my wedding, couldn't do that. And I couldn't actually alter the surface that I was running on necessarily. It was a bit more difficult, or the intensity with which I was having to do. I needed to alter the biomechanics. So some days when I had Achilles tendinopathy, I ran further forward, I ran forefoot. Sometimes when I had dorsiflexor problems, I'd try and run midfoot, I'd increase the amount of steps that I took per minute, and just do fancy wee things like that, or run on the opposite side of the road, or maybe go cross country. Rather than necessarily running on the road, just finding a trail that I could actually go towards Morocco on. It's also about involving the right people. There's no substitute for expertise, so guys such as Dan Broadhead for Borders Podiatry, great physios that I had helping me out and stuff such as that. And the advice that I'd got from friends and from people that knew a lot more than myself at that time and still do about the elements of science, things that I could do to prevent illness, things that I could do to prevent injury, that's what actually eventually got me to the finish lines. And here's what it comes down to in any of the challenges that I've done, be that over in Antarctica, be it in Outer Mongolia, the jungle, it's about doing the right things consistently, working out what's important in advance and getting it done. And that'll be different things for everyone in this room. Whether you're a runner, whether you're a rugby player, whether you're a golfer and stuff such as that. Preventing and treating illness and injury totally is possible. It's just a question of working out exactly what it needs to be and how. So I've got a wee example here. Essentially what I did was used ice, NSAID gel, ate the right sort of things, paid attention to my biomechanics, and things got a bit better. So sports medicine is pretty easy. I'm not the brightest candle in the cake by any means. So here's a wee example from the world of football. So what we try to do in sports medicine is work out what the diagnosis is. Can anyone tell us what this is? Correct, I heard it, a human bite. Here's what the treatment might be. So it might be about cleaning up, addressing that wound, and giving you some antibiotics. But sometimes it's all about prevention rather than cure. So it's about treating the root cause of a problem. So if you have pain at the front of your knee, or if you have Achilles problems, sometimes it's not just about getting that Achilles better, but it's about putting things in place that prevent that particular problem coming back. So to prevent this particular problem coming back, the Chelsea-Liverpool game last night, you can see Branislav And that's what I've got from so many people in different places. Essentially, what they've told me about sports medicine, what they've told me about running, is that be determined in your goals. Goals might seem ambitious, they might seem well out of reach, they might seem very difficult, but we can get there. There's always a way to find it. I also love the quote from Albert Einstein that says, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. If you're doing something and it leads to injury, then we need to change that slightly. We need to amend it, and once we've done that, hopefully that will go away. So it's about working out what you are doing that's leading to success and replicating it. So if you've done something that's worked out and it's been brilliant, then do it again. If not, let's try and do something different. So here are some of the common injuries. These are all injuries that I developed in that particular run and that I've had at different points in time as well. So hands up for who's ever had Achilles tendinopathy? I'm putting both hands up. Pain at the front of your knee, blisters, stress fractures, iliotibial band. I like this, I can read. But these are all injuries that, as Phil described, these are overuse injuries. These are things that we can either prevent or do something about. The acute injuries are the other ones that Phil talked about, like your ankle sprain, your calf, your hamstring tears. And again, things that we can advise about, but essentially they're less predictable. So that wasn't all roses. The trip to the Sahara was fantastic fun. You got to go through some amazing places: Scotland, France, Spain, Morocco. Anyone spot a missing country? And when you came over the high Atlas Mountains and you looked down and you saw this like green river of life just dwindling down into the desert, and you could see camels. They were farting, but they were And you look behind you and there's these massive mountains with ski fields on them. It's just absolutely incredible. But there were difficulties as well. I was running through parts of Africa, so there's an 8-year-old that ran past me. I became a bit anemic. I also met my nemesis, and this guy passed me on 2 occasions. And this is on the way back when he was unloaded. But you can see that another thing, I really like folk that have got facial hair. I don't have any myself, but we spoke about Einstein and now Da Vinci. The human foot is a masterpiece of engineering and it's a work of art. But if you can actually prevent these problems happening, it's a lot better than if you actually end up with them. The Sahara Desert leads to injury. It leads to blisters and stuff. And they were the feet of my friend Donnie Campbell, who came out, who didn't wear the plastic bags in his feet that would have prevented them. So what it comes down to essentially in sports injuries is working out what the actual diagnosis is. What's the problem? How we can actually provide effective treatment. And there's lots of stuff that can be done for any injury. I mean, often ice, putting anti-inflammatories onto it, after 48 hours, and considering getting some input from a physiotherapist or a sports medic if the injury isn't getting better, that tends to work. But it's also about thinking for yourself. Why have I developed this Achilles tendinopathy? Why have I got pain at the front of my knee? Why have I got, this pain in my elbow? For example, I remember seeing a professional badminton player that essentially had this mad elbow pain, and I was trying to get to the bottom of it for ages. I couldn't work out, hadn't changed anything, wasn't playing more badminton, wasn't actually playing more aggressively or anything such as that, and hadn't altered what she was wearing in her feet, hadn't changed her foot choice or anything. And it turned out she'd been doing some DIY and had been using a different type of drill from normal. So essentially that was the cause of the problem. So think about what you're doing, think if something could be predisposing to injury, and then just eliminate it. And if it gets better, you don't need to come to see us. And you can see how simple this formula is. It's always about what is the diagnosis, how can I treat it, often ice, anti-inflammatories, and how can I actually prevent this coming back. So you can see for Achilles tendinopathy, that's what I did. So essentially worked out that that was the diagnosis, you put those things into place, and I did things to prevent it coming back. Pain at the front of your knee, that's another really common injury. And there are a few different things that it can be, but often the treatment is relatively similar. It can be due to the actual ligament or tendon itself, it can be due to rubbing of the actual joint, or it can be due to various other things that are non-specific and that we can't identify on scanning. But usually paying attention to what you're doing and amending it slightly can lead to improvement. I did a wee survey of folk that wanted to speak about various injuries, and the most popular seemed to be iliotibial band syndrome. It's a fancy word for this bit that goes from there to there. And it is the most common cause of pain in the outside of a knee in runners. And essentially, if you have it, think of you running on the same side of the road all the time, because that's one of the really common things that we see. And other things can help it. Don't bother with a foam roller. Phil was quite right. So injury treatment is all about that. It's about optimizing load. It's about getting the right sort of input, correcting the correctable things that you can see, and sometimes there are specific medications that can help. There are specific injections that can occasionally help. There are scans that can be done. But often things as simple as icing it, elevating it, working at what's going on can be the most helpful and can get rid of 99% of injuries. So my advice on blisters: essentially do the training, wear a comfortable pair of shoes rather than buying a fresh pair for your first marathon or whatever, then just wear shoes that you're actually used to. If you're actually looking to treat a blister and it occurs, essentially if you just pop it at the lowest area and then squeeze the fluid out, then you can either leave it like that or put a bit of tape over it, and that's certainly what I do. So that was my run to the Sahara. It was pretty good crack. I got back in time for my wedding. I got passed by a load of donkeys. I broke my nose running into a road sign. And all these sort of things. But that's it. You know, for something to be a challenge, there needs to be an element of difficulty. There needs to be a chance of failure. So I was always looking for that next thing, be that a running challenge, be it a climbing challenge or whatever. But it just so happens that I'm not very good at these other things. I had to go back to do some running. Something that debilitated me at some point was an actual stress fracture. Does anyone remember when Henrik Larsson broke his leg? It wasn't actually that he got kicked, it was a stress fracture. He'd basically got a stress reaction so that the bone was under strain. He'd been playing with it for ages. And essentially, because he didn't listen to his body, then it went kaboom. So this is where you do get stress fractures. And everything that we've said about not actually stopping exercise when you've got a particular injury is right about everything other than stress fractures. If you have got a stress fracture, it requires rest of some description. And often you can get away with doing a bit of swimming or cross-training, but these things do require rest. And they're the ones that sometimes you get in your foot or your tibia, which is the bone in your lower leg. And the diagnosis is essentially made on MRI or X-ray. Another great question that I hear a lot from our athletes at the Institute or a lot of the rugby boys is, when can I train and when should I not train? Is it safe for me to do that when I've got a cold? Is it safe for me to do that when I've had my head amputated? And all sorts of ridiculous questions. Some basic rules that we tend to use is don't train if you've got a pulse that's over 80. So if you take your own pulse and it's more than 80, it's really easily done. It's just next to your watch and you just count it for 60 seconds. Then if it's over 80, we'd probably advise you not to do any training if that's your resting pulse. If it's more than 74, then consider doing a slightly lesser session. And again, if you're feeling unwell, if you've got a very high fever, if all your muscles are caning and stuff such as that, and if any of your symptoms are kind of below your neck, i.e. it's not just a head cold, then that's maybe the time to go easy. So that's some of the stuff that I've got about preventing and treating illness, some of the stuff about injury prevention. Do you guys want to hear about how guys actually get fast? Would that be more interesting? Grand. So essentially, I grew up in Kenya. From the age of 2 to 9, I lived in the Rift Valley in East Africa, and it was just absolutely beautiful, an amazing part of the world. And that part of East Africa is the single greatest and most concentrated production of world-class talent on earth. What's the population of Peebles? I don't actually know. I should have researched this. Grand. How about Innerleithen? Ah, I like it. So Iten is a town of 4,000 people. And in that town, essentially, there were more people from Iten at the 2011 World Championships than won medals from America. Sorry, not America. From the UK, from France, and from China combined. You know, this is a town of 4,000 people. So of the 100 fastest marathon times ran in the last 3 years, 70 of them come from people in that town. Imagine that. Imagine 70 of the best footballers in the world coming from Iten, or imagine 70 of the best footballers coming from Inverleithen. It'd be crazy. I know that 70 of the best rugby players in the world come from one of the borders towns. I'm sure it must be the case. But it's just a statistic that borders on the absurd. And I wanted to go back there. This is myself when I was at school in Kenya. If anyone's struggling, then I'm the one with the football. So I went over there to check it out. That was the latest expedition. And essentially I did two things. I went to work for UK Athletics working with our high performance squad. So you can see a picture of, it hasn't come out great, but that's with Mo Farah out there training. And essentially it was amazing seeing the dedication of Mo Farah, of our other athletes, but it was twice as amazing seeing how dedicated these East African athletes are. Does anyone recognise this guy? Yeah, exactly. So do you know, I mean, this is amazing. I think we'd all recognise some of the well-heralded football coaches like Alex Ferguson in the world, but this guy has coached 30 world champions and 20 Olympic champions. Brother Colm McConnell, and I think it just shows you that success emerges from unusual places. Speaking to Colm, he just said that he went over there as an Irish priest and as a teacher, looking to, I suppose, learn a bit from East Africa, looking to put a bit back, work out how the world worked. And he noticed that the local kids were pretty fast and they were doing a lot of exercise. On average, they do 5 hours of exercise per day. Looking at it from a context, essentially the average Scot watches 4.5 hours of television per day and does 22 minutes of exercise. So that's essentially where the difference is. So if we are looking for Scotland to be successful in the long term in athletics, perhaps either we can learn lessons from East Africa, lessons from Brother Colm, lessons from David Rudisha, lessons from Mo Farah, or perhaps we can just send all our televisions over there. So Brother Colm said it's actually not due to genetics. Essentially, people are well capable of doing whatever they are. There is some advantage to be living at altitude, and it does matter who your parents are. But essentially, it's all about doing the right sort of training. It's all about eating the right sort of things and getting adequate rest. And that's really much underestimated. He said that David Rudisha is much like a wild animal. Either he's off or he's on. He's either completely still or he's running really, really fast. He knows how to relax. So the secrets of high performance aren't really secrets. We know that if you train hard, we know that if you eat the right sort of things, if you rest and recover well, then you'll succeed, no matter what it is. And if you encounter injury, then you can deal with that as well. But it was amazing education going over there, learning from these East Africans, and a lot of the lessons we took, we applied, and that's how we ran up Kilimanjaro and across East Africa and stuff such as that. But again, in running or in sport in general, you can have the right people around you, but you can either be your own best friend or you can be your worst enemy. Essentially, running at the North Pole is very different to running in roads in Edinburgh, but it's actually very similar to running through bogs in the Highlands, and it's actually very similar to running through the Sahara Desert. It's just quite a lot of motion under your feet. You're not running on land, but you're running in the frozen Arctic Ocean. I remember well asking Richie Donovan, who's the race organiser, what would happen if a polar bear showed up, because they were spotted there the year before. And he just said, well, do you know, realistically, if they haven't paid the race entry, we'd just disqualify them. But going out to try and win the North Pole Marathon, it was about working out what's important, and that's the same in any race or in anything that you're looking to do in sport, I think. That's a great lesson that I've taken from some brilliant coaches. So for example, for me at the North Pole, the three big things for me that I wanted to do was to work out what food I could eat that wouldn't freeze, what clothing I would need to wear, and also what footwear would be required. So I tested all these three things out in the day before when we were actually at the North Pole. So my three options, footwear-wise, were to take out a pair of snowshoes, to take out a pair of golf shoes, you know, with the spikes, and also a pair of trainers to see which worked best, and to run for 5 minutes and to see how far I got. And scientifically, it showed that normal trainers are the best, so that's what I went with. So it's all working about what's best bang for your buck. Unfortunately, my favourite food of custard froze solid at the North Pole, so I wasn't allowed any of that. But that's what it's like in professional sport. If you're looking to be the best, if you're looking even to try and be your own best, then it is about doing the training, it's about eating well, it's about sleeping well, and it's also about involving the right people. The All Blacks are a fantastic example of that. Phil's great experience in rugby, he'll tell you that essentially these guys are a team. They work hard for each other, and the coaches are part of that team, along with their sports scientists, their sports medics, their physiotherapists. It's a really close unit that has a clear focus, that works really well together, and when adversity happens, when they're down with a couple of minutes to go in Dublin, they found a way to get it done. So I was always pretty confused as to who can help. I always think if you're looking to achieve something, getting a bit of coaching is great. For example, if you're looking to be better at tennis, the first thing that a lot of people try and do is to buy a fancier racket. It might help you a wee bit, but if you actually had a coach to try and, I suppose, talk you through how to hit that forehand or to, you know, work on some element of your game, that might lead to more improvement. So coaches are often very helpful, and there's some great running coaches in the Scottish Borders, and there's some great running coaches further afield. My own coach is a guy called Donnie Campbell. Sport shops, Phil mentioned 3 great sport shops in Edinburgh, Run For It, Footworks and Run and Become, all are absolutely superb. Sports medicine doctors, again, our skills I can discuss. Physiotherapy, osteopathy. These guys are key. If you have got an injury and you're looking to get on top of something, that can help a lot. And essentially, I've also had great help locally from Borders Podiatry in sorting out the way that I ran before. Again, it's amazing the help that you can get from your GP. My GP is a guy called Gordon Black in Edinburgh, and he's just helped me out so much. And again, orthopaedic surgeons. It's all about, I suppose, getting the right folk involved and working out what works for yourself. So they're just some of the folk that can help in sport. You might not need them, you might be grand yourself, and that's great as well. What do sports and exercise medicine people do? Essentially, we try and establish an accurate diagnosis. We try and put effective treatments in place when they're required, and also kind of advise regarding prevention. What things might be put in place to actually lead to the prevention of a particular illness or preventing a particular injury. So for example, a common cold, can we actually prevent that? You can decrease it significantly. So when we're doing work on the guys for the Ryder Cup, when we're doing work with the rugby guys, you can bet we'll be looking to put things such as giving folk first defence sprays if they're travelling on flights, making sure that on the right sort of nutrition and making sure that they're sleeping well. And if they develop a cold, if you take vitamin C and zinc, for example, you get better 16 hours faster. So it's not something that the NHS will necessarily give you, but just popping into the chemist and getting some vitamin C and zinc will cure that common cold a bit faster. When I went for my first swimming lesson, Kerry Buchan said to me, "Are you any good?" And I said, "No, I really am not any good." And I got out of the water and she said, "Do you know, you're right, you really weren't any good." But it's, I suppose, being out there, having fun, getting that extra benefit in terms of the happiness it gives us, in terms of the health benefit it gives us. And I suppose the challenge that I've got is, can each person in the audience maybe just share with your neighbour, or even just think to yourself, is there one or two key things that I can do to make it less likely that I get ill? Is there one or two things that I can put into my regime to help prevent injury that I can do myself? And are there things that I can do to increase the performance in whichever sport I favour? So have a feel free to think about that, and both myself and Phil will be more than happy to take any questions that you've got. I'd also really like to thank Merrill, who are one of my key sponsors, for giving me the chance to speak here, and thanks loads for your attention.